Welcome, everybody. This is the Food Donation Improvement Act webinar hosted by Food Rescue Hero. We will get started in a couple minutes. We're going to give people time to join us. Please feel free to drop in the chat where you're from, who you are, and what organization you're with, or what part of the country you're from. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome. As you come in, feel free to drop where you're from in the chat. Hi, Kevin. Lake Erie Food Rescue in the house. Hi, Aaron. Good to see a lot of friendly and familiar names here.
Hey, Tim.
Hi, Tim. There's a Chicago there. Hi, Michael from Table to Table. Little Free Food Truck. Love that name, Stephanie. Welcome. As you come in, please drop your name and where you're from in the chat. Oh, so many great organizations coming in. Exciting to see everyone here. We're going to give it another minute as people are still rolling in, and then we'll get started with the Food Donation Improvement Act webinar. We'll go over some of this when we start, but we're going to ask you to hold your questions till the end. You can drop them in the Q&A section during the webinar, so you don't forget them if you want, but we'll answer all questions at the end. Hi, Detroit. I just flew through Detroit yesterday. Unfortunately, didn't get more than a quick look at your airport. It's a great city. Welcome, everyone. I feel like this is like when you pop popcorn and it says wait until the kernels are less than 1 every second to take it out of the microwave. That's kind of like I'm watching people come in and waiting for it to slow down to get started. We're still popping. Now, who wants popcorn? Hi, Niyati. The real expert. You should be up here talking. All right. Welcome, everyone. I think we'll go ahead and get started now. The popping has slowed to a reasonable rate.
And just as one more reminder to keep questions, if you have questions, post them in the Q&A section rather than the chat. We will be getting to all those at the end if we don't cover it during the presentation.
Absolutely. That's a great question, anonymous attendee. Kind of wish I had a slide on that now, but we will answer it at the end. So no harm, no foul. Great. Okay. Thank you all for joining us today here to hear about the Food Donation Improvement Act. The response to this webinar was huge. We've had the most registrations and most attendees of any webinar yet. So that clearly this is a topic that is really of interest to everyone in the food recovery space. So I'm excited to talk with you about this today. I will give my disclaimer. I'm not a lawyer. And nor am I a legislator. I've done a lot of lobbying in my day and a lot of advocacy for laws. And obviously I'm deep into the food recovery space. So I feel, competent to talk about this, but I can't answer any legal questions, nor can I give legal advice. So we all know about the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act of 1996. And that's kind of what we base a lot of our operations on. And when we go out to talk to donors, I know that's always their first question, and we are ready to tell them about it. Basically, the Bill Emerson Act says that food donors who donate in good faith, apparently wholesome food or fit grocery products to a nonprofit for distribution to needy individuals are covered from liability. They don't have any liability if somebody gets sick. Basically, it limits liability for donors to gross negligence, like donating something that is very clearly not good. Nonprofit recipients are also protected by this as well. It doesn't cover rescued food that is sold at any cost to the end user. It doesn't cover direct donations to needy individuals or families, and it doesn't have any provisions for jurisdiction. So the Food Donation Improvement Act, which was written in, I want to say it started in 2019, I believe, or 2020. And was first introduced in 2021, does three things that help improve upon the Bill Emerson Act. First, it allows nonprofits to charge a Good Samaritan price for rescued food. Second, it allows direct donation to individuals. And third, it puts both the Emerson Act and the Food Donation Improvement Act under the jurisdiction of the USDA. So, great. What does that all mean? Well, let's break it down a little bit. So the Good Samaritan price, that is, this is a direct quote from the Act, a price that is amount to not greater than the cost of handling, administering, and distributing the apparently wholesome food or fit grocery product. That means that you can charge something that helps cover things like packing materials, labor, transportation, handling, but it cannot be greater than that cost. So you can't make a profit off of it. And the question always arises, well, why would you want to charge something? We give away the food that we rescue for free. Most of our organizations do. Most of the nonprofit organizations that I know of do. But there can be times where it makes sense to charge a price. So I'm going to give you three examples. There are a number of food recovery organizations that, like our partner 412 Food Rescue in Pittsburgh, make meals out of recovered food. So they get bulk donations and they turn them into meals. And this can be really important if you get food from, for example, a broadline distributor, and you get a giant hunk of meat that is just not really family size. It needs to be cut down. That can be a lot for an organization to handle. Certainly food pantries may not be able to handle that. Even some soup kitchens and cooking programs might struggle with if they get a lot of that. So the Good Food Project in Pittsburgh will break those things down and will create meals out of the bulk donations. This is really helpful because it can introduce additional options for families that are struggling with nutrition security, not just food security, but nutrition security. So if you are able to sell a meal for $1, for example, that is made from, fresh fruits and vegetables and lean protein, a family could purchase that, and instead of getting a Wendy's dollar meal for their dollar, could get a really wholesome meal. And so it increases the options for those families. Being able to charge $1 can help cover, for example, the cost of the containers. There's also a lot of pay what you can restaurants. So pay what you can restaurants are places that oftentimes take recovered food and they create, restaurant quality meals out of it. And then people can come in and order and literally pay what they can. There's a number of these around the country. These are really great social endeavors. Oftentimes they can help introduce an element of food dignity. There's one in Pittsburgh, for example, where, it's right next to a housing authority and residents can go and they can have a meal out. They couldn't necessarily afford to eat out at a restaurant, but now they're able to have that experience, and many of them then volunteer to give back their time. There's something very similar in Minneapolis, Minnesota. If there's anyone on the call here that knows about that can drop information in the chat. They do something very similar, again, where they're producing healthy food, healthy restaurant quality meals out of donated food, and then individuals pay what they can. So, there's an element of dignity to being able to go to a restaurant and purchase a meal at a rate that matches your budget, and nobody knows how much anybody is paying. And then, of course, there's been a number of experiments with things like nonprofit grocery stores that are rescuing food and providing a shopping experience to individuals where they're able to purchase food at a very, very low cost. And again, that Good Samaritan price would help cover the rent and the location space or employees to run that. And for people who are food insecure, it gives them the dignity of a shopping experience without having to pay grocery store prices. There also have been a number of mobile markets that will take fresh produce and other items around to neighborhoods, which increases both nutrition security as well as access. We know that getting to a place to pick up food, even a food pantry sometimes, which is geographically located, can be a challenge for families and individuals with mobility issues. Having mobile markets be able to go into the neighborhood allows them to purchase food and the food that they want and the food that they need without running into transportation issues. These mobile markets can now, again, charge a very small Good Samaritan price, which would allow them to cover costs and reduce the sort of financial burden on nonprofit partners or nonprofit efforts. So then the second thing that the Bill Emerson, or I'm so used to saying Bill Emerson, Good Samaritan Act, aren't we all? The second thing that the Food Donation Improvement Act does is qualifies direct donations for protection. So what does this mean? So a qualified direct donor, this is the actual text of the law. A qualified direct donor is what we think of when we think of food recovery. Grocery stores, wholesalers, agricultural producers, restaurants, caterers, schools, institutes of higher education, basically the organizations that are, or businesses that are already producing food for the public. Those donors would then have to donate that food again to a needy individual, and it has to be in good faith. So what is the purpose of this? I think if you're in food recovery, we've all had this experience where we get a call from a restaurant or a pizzeria, something like that, that at the end of the night, they have some leftover food. Sometimes it's just half a pizza or a sandwich or something like that. And it is, I hate to say no to that, but sending out a volunteer at 10 o'clock at night to pick up half a pizza just doesn't make a lot of sense. Now those businesses can actually donate food to the individuals that may be in their neighborhood and looking for food. I know that we've heard from a lot of business owners that they would really like to be able to, at the end of the night, donate the food that they have left over to the people that are in their community that are in need of food, and they have not felt okay doing that, again, because of those liability issues. This act protects that. We're not going to see donors like grocery stores doing this. I feel really confident in saying grocery stores have no interest in doing this. That is, they would be unable to quantify it for their tax benefits, and that's a lot of work for them. This is really going to help those small businesses that are generally not the best donors for a food recovery organization. And then finally, the act requires the USDA to sort of take ownership on this this law. So the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act really had no clarification of ownership or education for the act. There was no one able to indicated to answer questions or publish regulations. Now, the USDA did publish some answers to frequently asked questions about the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act in 2020, but it was not very proactive in educating or doing much about the BEGSA, and it took until 2020 for them to even do that. The Food Donation Improvement Act is specifically the responsibility of the USDA to publish clarifying clarification for date labeling and packaging and things like that for donated food. So this does two things that I think are really exciting. One, it lends a lot of credence to the law. If nobody is answering questions and nobody knows where to go to ask questions about a law, how seriously can donors take it? Now donors know who it is that is specifically monitoring and kind of giving them permission to donate and be protected from liability. It also puts some very specific, governmental weight behind the act. And again, that's what donors want to see. You can go to a donor and say that the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act protects them, but a lot of them say, that isn't quite enough, right? It's just not quite enough to know that a law passed 20 years ago. There's never been a test of it. There's nobody to go out and educate on it. There's no government authority to ask questions of. So it almost feels a little bit sketchy, dare I say. Putting this under the USDA really lends that voice of authority. And so donors who may be a little bit skittish, they have somewhere to turn. And so that's really exciting. Oh, here we go. These are all the things I just said. Karen, I'm sorry, you made these beautiful slides and I just slid right over them because I got very excited to talk about this. So what this act means for food recovery organizations, there's a couple of things. So first of all, there's a lot of expanded opportunity here for creative programming and for revenue generation, or I should say cost coverage. You can help cover the cost of your programming. Again, paying for things like packaging, labor to repack or cook food, operational expenses. Even if you're going to do something like a pay what you can restaurant or a pay what you can grocery store, it can help cover rent and things like that. And then it also creates more options for food and nutrition access for end users. Like the programs I talked about, we can turn rescued food into healthy meals that are sold at low cost. We can give them access in multiple different ways to healthy food, culturally appropriate foods. And this is something for any of you that were at ReFed last year, the ReFed conference, if you went on the one field trip, that was a big topic of conversation, is how to provide culturally appropriate food to many of the populations we serve. And then really important, dignity in access. Being able to, pay what you can for groceries, to shop and choose what you want, to go out to eat. Those are things that bring a lot of dignity to the process of, really charitable food access. I do want to say that we do want to watch for what's going to happen with the clarifying regulations from the USDA. They're within 180 days, they need to clarify quality and labeling standards for donated food, as well as date regulations. And I think we all know that sometimes well-meaning government officials can create unnecessarily and unintentionally prohibitive regulations. Certainly we've seen some health departments get overly excited about regulating rescued food and put all sorts of onerous and unnecessary restrictions on it. And so we really want to keep our eye on what the USDA does with that. There may, in fact, be some need for some more lobbying if the regulations that they publish are problematic. So we still will have an opportunity to work together and to mobilize as a community if that does, in fact, happen. Now, for those of you that are nervous about lobbying, I know a lot of times when I say, well, we've got to lobby for this, we've got to talk to our government officials, people get anxious or think that they can't make a difference. But it was really the work of not just Food Rescue Hero, but a lot of food recovery organizations and Weight Watchers, who is on this call right now and did a tremendous job leading a huge effort to get this act passed, that this happened. And, the government officials, elected officials care. We worked with Senator Toomey's office to ensure that the Food Donation Improvement Act included important additions. We really wanted that Good Samaritan price covered for meals that were produced, for example, and we were able to, get that added. And not only did Food Rescue Hero, but along with our network partners, Weight Watchers, Food Rescue US, a number of other organizations across the country went to a lobby date and spoke to elected officials, and also engaged key senators and members of Congress within the conversation for why this was important, what difference it would make, and why it mattered. And so, don't be nervous if the opportunity arises or the need arises to go and talk to USDA and have them actually, clarify their clarifying comments. We're all in this together, and really, if we all speak with not even just one voice, but in one direction, I think we can make sure that the enactment of the Food Donation Improvement Act actually serves the purpose, which is to help encourage food donation and make sure that as much of the food that is wasted gets to people who need it. And with that, I'm going to turn it to questions. I'll tell you that we will have another webinar in a couple of weeks for those of you who are interested, who want to learn more about Food Rescue Hero and our technology. We get a lot of requests to talk about this. We're just going to do a case studies webinar with some of our partners and talk about what impact that had. So that'll be on Wednesday, February 22nd.
I just shared the link for that webinar in the chat. I'll post it again. It seems like there's a lot of activity in the chat, so I'll post that again right at the end. But please
Awesome.
Copy and save that. Jen, it looks like we've got a ton of questions already.
Okay.
In the Q&A session. We will try and get to all of them. If we don't get to any, please follow up with either Jen or I. Will also drop a link, or I will drop a link right now to schedule a follow-up meeting with myself. And yeah, so the first question, let me get back to it, that I saw. In addition to federal protection, do we also need state legislation as well?
Great question. Also, I just want to say there's a lot of great, I was just looking at the chat, there's a lot of great comments in there. Yes, Senator Blumenthal was the Democratic counterpart. Toomey is no longer our state senator, he's retired, and Senator Fetterman is now the Pennsylvania senator, so and Senator Casey. So just to answer those. Yeah, so the federal act preempts any lesser state regulations or lack of state regulations. So you don't need state regulations. It can't hurt though, And state regulations can potentially get more specific if you've got very specific circumstances in your state. If you're an agricultural state, for example, there may be a need for some specific language regarding producers. I heard, and I don't know if this is true, and I actually need to check this, but I heard that in Pennsylvania, dairy farmers receive a subsidy from the state, and that makes it difficult for grocery stores to donate milk, for example. And so that might be something that on a state level would be important to know about and to work on.
Tim Hawkins from Butte County in California asked, let me read it. Organizations that pick up food from stores under Feeding America in our area are unable to share with other partners. At times, this leads to food waste when the partner is unable to distribute everything they can pick up. Feeding America has this policy to streamline any recalls for safety reasons. Should this act allow Feeding America to change that policy and thereby reduce the food waste that is caused by the policy?
I'm just reading this. So I don't think that the inability to distribute from, like, once you distribute to one organization, that's not anything to do with the federal law. That is a Feeding America policy. So I don't know that we need a federal law to allow for that. Specifically, there could be a federal law that requires that that's allowed. That would be the next step, I think.
Umi Feeds typed, it's a great question. I wondered if I could charge people for the donated food I received for free as a way to raise money.
So you can, again, it has to be a small amount, a Good Samaritan amount, less than, obviously less than they would pay in the grocery store, and only to help cover handling, materials, supplies, things like that, labor, things like that.
So Chris,
and previous to this act, you could charge a nonprofit. So we could, you could sell food at a low cost. You could charge a price to a nonprofit that you were delivering food to. They just couldn't have that cost roll down to the end user.
Chris, I think that answered your question as well. Chris Wilcox, let us know if it did not, and certainly type another question or addition to your question. Shannon McDonald asked, so would, let's say, Dunkin' Donuts be allowed to bring their donuts out to donate at the end of the quote unquote day?
Yeah.
And then also additionally, is there any focus on the health, as in not just calories, but the actual healthy food of the food being donated?
Not in this law. So first of all, yes, Dunkin' Donuts can donate their donuts directly to anybody at the end of the day. They can hand them out on the street. The law does require, in order for liability protection, that it's donated to needy people, quote unquote. I hate that term. I just want to say that. But you could probably, there's no deep dive into what that means. Let me just say that. As for food quality, there's nothing in this law that says anything about the quality of food being donated. I know food rescue organizations, many of them focus on trying to provide high quality food and to, address nutrition security as well. But there's nothing in this law that requires that. The law already took effect. It was signed by President Biden sometime in January.
Karina Bozarth asked, when does this new law take effect?
That was the question I just answered. It's already in effect.
Is the act available in Spanish, Vietnamese, Chinese, or Korean?
That's a great question, and I don't know the answer to that. I don't know.
Okay. I'm sure
if
that
anybody else knows, I actually don't know. I know that some agencies are required to publish regulations in multiple languages, but I don't know. I don't think the same goes for acts of Congress. And the USDA has not published anything yet, unless it just happened in the last day or two, I believe. Somebody can tell me if I'm wrong. And I don't know if they're required to translate as well.
Mackenzie Bolger, or Bolger, sorry for mispronouncing that. I asked, is there a percentage or rate that food rescue organizations need to abide by for these costs?
No. There's nothing in the law.
Okay.
I can imagine a scenario where if it were abused, that it might result in clarification with more specifics, but right now there's nothing.
Regarding donations to direct individuals, who will be responsible to implement or strategize cold storage for maintaining temperatures for direct donations to parents, guardians of students receiving donations?
There are no stipulations for that in the law. Again, I think that the vision for that was specifically businesses like a pizza restaurant at the end of the night giving out their pizza to a homeless person who was expected to eat it right away.
Julie Johnson asked, is anyone considering charging Good Samaritan pricing?
I don't know. Well, I mean, there's already some organizations that are doing that. Their donors did not necessarily have liability protection, which for some donors is okay. I know that 412 Food Rescue had originally envisioned the Good Food Project as creating meals that would be sold, for example, in like a corner store next to those banquet frozen meals, those like 99-cent mac and cheese banquet frozen meals or something. But that was a number of years ago that was the vision. So I don't know where they are with that right now.
And Jen, do you know what the Good Samaritan price is? I saw somebody asking about that.
Yeah, no, I don't. There's nothing that requires it to be anything less. It has to be less than the cost of that list that I read at the beginning.
We have two questions in the Q&A section about the definition of a quote unquote needy individual. I know you said I don't like that
Great
term.
questions.
Yeah. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, there is no clarification. There's no clarification in the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act either. Sorry, my brain went off in another direction. So there are governmental programs that define level of need, for example, to be qualified for SNAP benefits. And theoretically, one could apply that to be safe, but there is no specific breakdown in this law.
Okay. Amanda Ruffner asked, does the extended protection for direct donations apply to community fridges, or is this only applicable if restaurants, et cetera, donate directly to an individual?
Ooh, that's a great question that I don't know the answer to. I don't think that the community fridge would be considered a direct donation to an individual. This is just my thoughts on it. I suspect whoever's running that community fridge, the nonprofit that is in charge of it, would be the recipient, and therefore they would be protected because they're donating to that nonprofit.
Cassie Olofsson asked, can you please confirm the new language covers donations to any organization and individual, i.e. no 501c3 status? Also, does this provide liability protection for the organizations and individuals that serve donated food to community members? I believe those are both.
It does not cover donation to an organization that is a for-profit. Okay. No 501c3 status or similar nonprofit status. It only covers donation to individual people. Like if you hand somebody a sandwich, that's what that specific paragraph is about. If you hand it to a needy individual specifically. What was the rest of that question? Jake, you made it go away too fast.
See, hang on, I'm going back to it.
Okay, there we go. I got it.
Okay.
Does this provide liability? Does this provide liability protection for the organization and individuals that serve donated food to community members? Again, it has not been tested. I think it is arguable to say, especially if you open it up to community members, so that people who need a meal can get a meal, but you don't discriminate on who. takes the food, then yes, you would be covered. It has not been tested yet, and I am not an attorney. That is the assumption that we've been operating under. But again, until it's tested, if it's not specifically written in the legislation, there's no definitive answer.
Cheryl Collin asked, not sure how I understand how this act will improve culturally appropriate food distribution. What's the tie-in?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So if you are able to make culturally appropriate meals, so a lot of the organizations that are doing some of this creative program are specifically taking food and turning it into culturally appropriate meals. I know that we visited some places in Minnesota that were making halal meals to hand out to people. They were also able to provide them, for example, for children who were whose parents had been taken into court and the children were in temporary care. They were able to provide them with a meal that was culturally appropriate, and they were able to actually recover some of the costs. So they were working with restaurants and businesses that do that sort of thing. They were able to provide them with a small stipend to make these meals.
There are two questions from anonymous attendees. They may be the same person, I don't know. How can we convince directors at our university to not feel like we need separate liability insurance? Do we need liability insurance?
Universities are tough, really tough. So I don't know what university you're at, but I will tell you that there is actually an organization, Food Recovery
Network.
Thank you. Food Recovery Network that specifically works with universities and students at universities. We do as well. We've got a number of our partners who work with universities directly, but Food Recovery Network has a lot of experience with, working with that bureaucratic structure. So if you're having trouble getting in, I would suggest you talk to them.
And then another one, we have had grocery stores in our neighborhood say they cannot donate food because of liability concerns. Are there resources we can share with them about this new legislation?
So yeah, actually, like I said, in 2020, I keep wanting to say 1920. I don't know why. In 2020, the USDA did create an FAQ for the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act, and that's on their website. So you can certainly print that out. But I also, very convincing, the Harvard Food Law and Policy Center has a printout on the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act. And so a lot of times that's just what our partners hand them. It's got Harvard on there. That's, super impressive. If Harvard says it's true, it must be true. And that is something that they provide. You can also talk about the fact that most major retailers have food donation programs. I'm not sure what grocery store it is that is concerned about this, but I'm going to guess they're an independent one, or they're using that as an excuse to put you off, which sometimes happens.
Brittany Sims asked, what are you expecting to hear from date labeling clarification?
I actually don't know. I'm honestly, and Nieti, if you have, oh, great. Yeah. So Nieti is going to have some updated information that you can share on their website, which, can you drop your website in the chat, please? Oh, there it is. There's your email, but if you can drop your website in there too, if you've got information on it. What was the question I was answering before I saw that?
Let me go back. Oh, I lost it as well. I marked it as. What are you expecting to hear from date labeling?
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. I don't know. I'm nervous about it because I've seen some health departments do some pretty ridiculous things if they don't really understand what food recovery looks like. So I'm definitely nervous about date labeling and product labeling requirements. I think what I would hope to see is that for prepared food, that a generic allergen warning is appropriate, is okay. That's what I know a lot of businesses use. And then for date labeling, I'm hoping that they will allow donation of dairy product, for example, past its sell by date.
Kathy Hay asked a clarifying question that's kind of interesting on the Dunkin' Donuts case. So if I were to get donuts from Dunkin' Donuts at the end of the day and put them in little free pantries, or do I have to eat them myself?
If you work at Dunkin' Donuts, is that what you said?
No, it sounds like asking the question just from if a customer were to walk in, or not a customer, just a person were to walk in. If basically, so if a person were to walk into Dunkin' Donuts at the end of the day and put them in a little free pantry, is that acceptable, or do they have to eat them themselves?
No, I think putting it in a little free pantry would be okay. Because in that instance, let me just clarify. In that instance, let's say you're a person on the street and you're going into Dunkin' Donuts to ask them to donate those donuts. You're actually acting as an intermediary to have them put into the little free pantry, which is then the sort of nonprofit entity, which is distributing the food to individuals. Dunkin' Donuts is giving them to the little free pantry, not to you. You're the transportation or the intermediary.
Susan Miller Davis asked, is there a specific documentation that a nonprofit would need to maintain to prove or document how their Good Samaritan price relates to costs?
Again, it has not been tested. There are no regulations about this right now. I think I would just be very thorough in how you would track that and be able to demonstrate it.
Gina Osborne wanted to know, is there a place where we can find a list of pay what you can restaurants, I should say?
Ooh, I don't know where there's a list. I just was, I knew of a couple, so I just kind of Googled to look around, and I didn't find any specific list, but I saw,
Yeah, I would imagine that a Google search would be your best friend there. I don't know
if somebody wants to collect a resource like that and publish it, it would be great. I know of a couple restaurants, but even there, where I found out about them was news articles. There's no one resource on it that I know of.
Paul asked, does this apply? I'm assuming meaning the act. Does this apply to farmers too? Let's say we ask farmers to give.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Farmers are specifically covered.
Let's see. Would a school food authority be permitted to donate food to individuals or families to take home with them?
Yes.
Let's see. Can you clarify how this impacts community fridges, mostly running through Can you clarify how this impacts community fridges, mostly running through mutual aid programs and are not registered as a 501c3 by design? I'm not sure what the exact question is there.
How is the mutual aid program registered for tax purposes? Let me just ask that.
Okay. Haley, if you want to clarify, then you may be able to answer that better.
Theoretically, that could count as donating to an individual. If the little free pantry is not a registered entity and it just is a, I don't know, box sitting on somebody's property.
Sure.
For people in need.
Is the old law still in place? Yes, I believe that this just builds up upon the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act.
Correct.
Cassie had a follow-up question. Would this cover nonprofits that do not have a 501c3 status? So for a nonprofit, but not necessarily an official nonprofit.
Let me look at the specific language. All right, I am going to equivocate on this answer as I am not an attorney. And it has, as far as I know, and if anybody on the webinar can give a better answer, again, none of this has ever been tested, right? And until it's tested, it doesn't receive a lot of clarification. Usually clarifications to laws come because it's tested. Somebody sues over it, or challenges something, or gets challenged over something, and it's put to the test, and the court will issue a clarification, or the legislature, one of the two. And so this has never been tested. I personally have been arguing for years that as long as it's not a for-profit organization and it is serving people in need. So for example, a lot of our partners work with housing authorities, right? The housing authorities are not 501c3s, but they serve very specifically people that are low income, that meet income requirements for living there. And we donate food through them to those people, right? That has not been tested, but I believe because it's going to people who are actually really income qualified as low income, that food would be protected as if it were going through a nonprofit. And at the end of the day, you can argue that our food rescue organizations are all 501c3s, and so they could be the nonprofit receiving food.
Looks like the questions are kind of slowing down, so we'll try and get to all the questions in the that are typed out. Karina typed, I'd like to rephrase, is the school food authority required to donate to individuals or families of school food to take home? I'm concerned about the cold storage ability, HACCP control during bus trips, walking, car ride homes. Yeah.
There's no regulation covering that. And I would be concerned about giving children food that was TCS, temperature controlled, for safety, not spoilage, but safety, if they were not in the company of an adult. If they're with an adult, it's fine. It's no different than going to the grocery store. As long as it's in a refrigerator until you give it to them, and then you give them something that's TCS, give it to the parent as they're leaving school, that's fine. There's no need to worry about how they're temperature controlling that as they get home. But again, a child with a backpack, I would never give anything to a child that was TCS if they were not with an adult. I probably wouldn't give something that would spoil to a child, even like milk, which isn't temperature controlled for safety, but would spoil unless they were with an adult.
Are there any regulations in place to prevent profiting off of food recovery?
No. You can profit off of food recovery, but as long as the donor of the food consents to it, and knows that they aren't covered by liability or protection.
Does this law supersede, Susan asked, does this law supersede food bank requirements that donated food not be quote unquote sold?
Yes. That's a food bank requirement. That is not a legal requirement. The Feeding America and the food bank can make all the regulations they want and require that of their partners, and even have legally binding contracts to that extent, but it is not a law.
Gina asked, if a food bank operates an after-school supper program with food from USDA, can they allow the children to take any leftover food home? In the past, they could not.
That is a tricky question. I'm not going to answer that because I don't know if there's been any clarification on it. I know in Pennsylvania and locally, we did some work to get a law passed about share tables for schools, that they could leave things like apples, but that doesn't necessarily answer the USDA question. And I know that the school districts, I know some school districts donate. I mean, I know some of our partners have gotten food from school districts. Does that technically violate the USDA? Maybe, I don't know. But that would be a great thing to lobby for. I think we should do that. I think we should check into that and do that. I'm gonna lead that. Did I just volunteer to do something else, Jake?
What?
Did I just volunteer to do something else, Jake?
I didn't.
I'm going to see if there's anybody that is actually working on that, because I think if that is specifically forbidden, then that's something we could easily probably lobby to change.
Stephen asked, is there a good one pager that can be distributed to places that might be interested in increasing their food donations to know more about what they can or cannot do? I believe we answered this, but let's cover it again.
Well, I mean, legally, the legal requirements that you're protected from liability. Nieti said that, you know, they're working on releasing one. Harvard has the BEGSA handout. USDA has the FAQ. But I think that it makes sense to produce one for yourself. I know that we have one that we give to all of our partners that kind of shows what is donatable and what's not. It is a sticky question because various organizations will have their own internal stipulations about what can be taken and what can't be taken.
Umi Feeds asked, can you donate food to a school?
Yes. Or to the, yeah.
Okay. Is there a way to follow up the date labeling discussion? We encourage gardeners to donate their produce which have no labels to start with. Is there a way to ensure these donations would still be protected and allowed?
Yeah. Date labeling is for, yeah, definitely. They're not going to say that there has to be a date label on zucchini. I am certain of that. The question is, as we all know, date labeling is something that is really mercurial to begin with, right? You've got sell by dates and used by dates and best by dates and quality date, and you know, some things have no dates that should have dates. There is no national standard on that. I think specifically what this is referring to is that things that do have a date, you know, in what range can they be donated? That is to be seen though. And so that again is my concern, is that if it can't be donated past its sell by date, like I would have a real problem with that. Yogurt is already spoiled milk, you know, a sell by date on yogurt means nothing at all. Even a best by date on yogurt is not necessarily going to indicate any safety issue. It's really a quality issue. And so I think that's where we really want to be watching what the USDA is going to do on that.
Jen, I want to be cognizant of time. We're up against our time. Do we have time to answer more, or are you at a hard stop at 1:50?
Well, let's take a quick look at what is unanswered and if there's any overlap or anything. So to the question about school food, schools that have cooked food, are they allowed to donate it or not? They would be protected from liability. Yes, absolutely. They can donate that. Is there a USDA regulation that prevents them from donating food that the USDA paid for? Maybe. That I don't know, but they are allowed to. And this act specifically mentions schools as a qualified donor. Yes, a save table, a parent or child could take that with them from the save table as they leave. And there's nothing in this law that says anything about cold chain or anything like that. But I would say best practice, I would not leave out TCS food for kids to take without a parent. You're not selling the goods. What you're doing is you are charging a Good Samaritan price to help cover the processing.
Will the answers to these questions be sent out? They're not being written down anywhere, but the recording will be sent out and posted on our website. I think it also sent out to attendees within a week of this, I believe. Yeah.
I'm going to answer one more question before we go. And that is two more things. One, can private individuals donate leftover food from weddings, parties, other events directly to nonprofit agencies and or needy individuals? A private individual is not covered in this for donating food. However, your caterer is covered. So if you have a catered wedding, the food that you catered can be donated. That you had catered can be donated. Some and protected from liability. Some nonprofits will take food that is home cooked. That is a case by case. So you have to talk to the nonprofit to find out. It is not specifically covered under this law. This law is to protect qualified food donors, merchants, schools, caterers from liability. And the last thing I want to say is, again, I am not an attorney. I've done a lot of advocating and lobbying, and I live in the world of food rescue and have thought a lot about these things, and that's where my expertise comes from. But if you want a legally binding answer, ask an attorney. Don't take anything I said to bank if you're concerned. Check it out for yourself. You should always check it out for yourself. But this should hopefully give you all a great foundation for knowing what questions to ask as you think through your programming that exists, your future programming, and how you can, use this law and the expansion of this law to work with even more donors. If you do have other questions, please feel free to email Jake, and we will get those, do our best to answer them for you. I would know that Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinic, as well as Niete, who put her email in here, have been doing a lot of work on this and may also have questions. Then finally, you can always go to the USDA and ask them. They are now required to sort of publish those clarifying regulations. Thank you so much, everybody. Appreciate your attendance today. Great questions, great conversation.
Thanks, Jen.
Bye.